सर्वोपनिषदो गावः दोग्धा गोपालनन्दनः उद्धवो वात्सलो वात्सो भोक्ता च स्वयं सदा द्वा सुपर्णा सयुजा सखाया समानं वृक्षं परिशस्वजाते तयोरन्यः पिप्पलं स्वाद्वत् अनश्नन् अन्योः अभिचाकशीति समाने वृक्षे पुरुषो निमग्नो अनीशय शोचति मुह्यमानः तुष्टं यदा पश्यति अन्यम् ईशम् अस्य महिमानमिति वीतशोकः. A glorious declaration from the Mundakopanishad. We have been relishing this conversation, a very glorious conversation between Uddhava and Krishna. Right at the beginning, I tweaked the popular Gitamrita shloka to make it Uddhava Gitamrita shloka. Sarvopanishado gavaha dogdha gopala nandhanaha. This is the first part of the popular shloka. Partho vatsa sudhir bhokta dugdham Gitamritam mahad. In the case of Gitamrita, Bhagavan is the milker of the cow. All the Upanishads are the cow. Bhagavan is the milker of the essence, the nectar of the Upanishads. Partha is the calf. Partho vatsa sudhir bhokta. The wise men are the drinkers of the milk. We see one fundamental difference between Uddhava Gita and Bhagavad Gita. In the case of Bhagavad Gita, Partha, Arjuna is a Vyaja, is only an instrument. Uddhava is much more than a Vyaja. We must understand this fundamental difference, because Arjuna never got into this conversation for the sake of attaining Krishna. Moksha prapti, Bhagavat prapti was not the objective of Arjuna. But in the case of Uddhava Gita, Uddhava's overriding goal is Krishna and Krishna alone. So therefore, the essence of Upanishads that was bestowed by the milker Gopala Nandanaha to Uddhava, therefore instead of Partho vatsa sudhir bhokta, Uddhavo vatsalo vatsaha. Uddhava had vatsalya for Krishna, and he also happens to be the bhokta. Uddhavo vatsalo vatsaha bhokta cha swayam sada. He himself was the bhokta too of this nectar. So the difference there is, in both the cases, Krishna gave the very essence of Upanishads, but Uddhava was on a different pedestal altogether. Uddhava was a supreme bhakta. And we see, therefore, in this conversation, Krishna also draws a lot from the Upanishads. Of course, Gita too. But in the case of Uddhava Gita, we see direct references. We see similar analogies used in the Upanishads to teach. One such popular analogy which is covered in the Mundakopanishad. Dva suparna sayuja sakhaya samanam vriksham parishasvajate. We all have heard of this beautiful analogy of these two birds perched on a branch of a tree. One is the Jivatma, the other is the Paramatma. In the 11th chapter of the 11th skandha, Krishna uses a similar analogy. Now we have completed the 10th chapter of the 11th skandha, which was primarily around transmuting karma to Kainkarya. The whole of the 10th chapter, Krishna dealt with how can one perform karma, transform it, and eventually transmute it into kainkarya. Transmute it. That's why we called it alchemy of action. Now, in this chapter, Krishna is going to take up a very profound subject. The subject of samsara, samsara bandhana, and samsara moksha. Bondage and liberation. So this chapter is going to deal with the differences between a baddha jiva and a mukta jiva. And also Krishna is going to talk about the means for the baddha jiva to become a mukta jiva. And in that process, Krishna also talks about how he is distinct and different. Similar echoing the message of the 15th chapter. Uttama purushastvanyah paramatmetu dahrataha yo lokatrayamavishya vibharti avyaya ishvaraha. Where he first talks about baddha jiva and mukta jiva, and then he says he is the uttama purusha. So again we see Krishna echoing messages from the Purushottama Yoga too in this chapter. So this is a brilliant segment of this conversation where Krishna imparts profound philosophy and also practice associated with the philosophy. Krishna begins by first making a very clear clarification. Bhaddo mukta iti vyakhya gunato mena vastutaha gunasya maya moolatvan name moksho na bandhanam. He talks about how Bhagavan is neither a baddha nor a mukta. Bandhana and mukti belong to the Jivatma and not to the Paramatma. Now we must understand what is the state of this bondage that Krishna describes here and also in detail even in the Gita. We can simply understand, taking the analogy that we are all very well aware of, analogy of the phone and the calls. Today also it's very fashionable that all of us have different ringtones. So just imagine if there are different kinds of ringtones, some which are very sweet, some which are very harsh, and all the time we are either delightfully absorbed in the sweetness of a ringtone or ranting at the harshness of a ringtone, and in the process we don't take the calls. What is the purpose of the phone? The purpose of the phone is to take the call for the message. Life too is constantly giving us messages. And who is giving this message? Krishna is giving us the message. Pleasures and pains of life are like the ringtones of the phone. We cannot just delight in the sweetness of the pleasures and rant at the harshness of the pains. And in the process, forget that we are supposed to take the call and get the message. Every pleasure, every pain actually is indicating that there is a call which has a very important message for us. What would we say if someone doesn't attend to his calls and is only absorbed in the ringtones of the phone? We will say he is a mudha. A samsari is a mudha. Absorbed in just the ringtones of life, the pleasures and the pains, and does not pick up the call to get the message. Samsara is a state where we are blissfully ignorant, unfortunately. And Krishna is going to talk about ignorance versus knowledge. Avidya versus Vidya being the causes for bondage and liberation. Before that, here in the very first shloka, he clearly says, Hey Uddhava, every Jivatma, When we say Jivatma, the Chit Tattva. Interestingly, the Chit Tattva can only be in two modes, can only operate in two modes. We have three tattvas: Achit, Chit, Ishvara. Achit Tattva is Prakriti, the insentient matter. Chit Tattva, all the Jivatmas, the sentient souls, the conscious beings. Ishvara Tattva, Bhagavan, Paramatma, Narayana. The Chit Tattva can only operate in two modes. When it identifies with the Achit Tattva, when it becomes the slave to Achit Tattva, it becomes Achit-like. And that is the state of samsara. When it becomes a slave to the Ishvara and becomes Ishvara-like, that is moksha. It is as simple as that. It can only operate in two modes. Essentially, the Chit Tattva, by its nature, is a Sesha, which means a servant. It can be a servant to Achit Tattva, or it can become a servant to Ishvara. It cannot be anything else. So samsara means servitude to the world, servitude to Prakriti. Moksha means servitude to Bhagavan. Now, this samsara bandha and samsara moksha are obviously not applicable to Bhagavan himself. Therefore, he says, this essentially, these are bondage and liberation can be considered for the Jivatma as simple measures of the Atman's distance from its remembrance of truth. When the Jiva forgets the truth, it is in samsara. When the Jiva remembers the truth and remains in that remembrance, it is in moksha. Again, another very simplistic way of explaining samsara and moksha. Essentially, forgetfulness of Krishna is samsara. Remembrance of Krishna is moksha. Now, Krishna is the remembered. So, therefore, for him there is no bandha and moksha. Therefore, he says, Baddho mukta iti vyakya gunato mena vastutaha. Bondage and liberation are not applicable to me. Hey Uddhava, gunasya maya moolatvan name moksho na bandhanam. There is no liberation and bondage for me. Name pattasti kartavyam trishu lokeshu kinchana. Gita shloka. Nanavaptam avaptavyam vartayevacha karmani. Arjuna, Krishna says, hey Partha, you have a duty to perform. You have no other choice. Doing your duty is ordained, mandatory. You cannot escape. Even I perform my duty, even though I am not obligated or ordained to perform any duty. So we must understand why that is that we must perform our duties. Two reasons. One reason is because we keep doing actions in our life and living primarily for only one reason. It is to become complete. Now, we all are apurna, incomplete. And therefore, by doing actions, we try to become purna. If we really look at anything that we do in our life and living, essentially we do actions to become complete, because there is that lingering sense of incompleteness in us all the time. And anything that we do is to make us somehow complete. So in a way, our life's journey is a journey from a state of incompleteness, trying to get to a state of completeness. So therefore, we must perform our duties. The other reason also is the way the life and living is designed. Bhagavan has designed this world in such a way that We just cannot remain taking all the time. Consumption is not the only thing. Contribute we must. Yajnarthat karmanonyatra. Saha yajna praja srishtva purovacha prajapatihi. Yajna is the very bedrock, is the very DNA of creation. So which means we cannot lead our lives just by taking all the time. At least sometimes we must give. We must ideally be giving all the time. We must be giving more than taking, but we cannot remain just taking. So therefore, performing duty is also for giving, to compensate, to balance our taking. Now, in the case of Bhagavan, he is Purna. He is always Purna, he is always complete. There is no reason for him to do any action. He is Satyakama, is Satya Sankalpa, he is always Purna. And he is never taking, he is only giving. So what is the need for him to perform any duty? Krishna says, Name partasi kattavyam trishu lokeshu kinchana nanavaptam avaptavyam vartayevacha karmani. Even in spite of this, I perform duty. That is why Bhagavan keeps doing actions all the time, whether as when he descends and takes avatars, or even when he is here within as Antaryami as well. But his actions, we don't call them as duty, we can call them as his Leela. And what does he do? Essentially, he is reciprocating love all the time. Therefore, here he says, I keep doing my duty. And what is his duty? Protecting us all the time, giving us love, reciprocating whenever, all the time, intervening all the time. And he says, it is for the Jivatma who is bound. And what binds? He says, Gunasya maya moolatvam. Gunatomena vastutah baddha mukta iti vakya gunatah. It is the gunas of Prakriti which bind the Jivatma. It is the gunas of Prakriti which bind. But to Bhagavan, he is the owner of the gunas. Maya, he is Mayavi. Maya binds the Jiva, whereas the Mayavi governs Maya. He says, Gunasya Maya Moolatva. He is the Niyanta. He governs Maya. He controls Maya. He is not controlled by Maya. So he says, I am never touched by the gunas because he is above and beyond the three gunas. He is Shuddha Sattva Maya. And he also says, I am the Niyanta of Maya. Gunasya Maya Moolatvam. Ame mokshana bandhana. Maya, Prakriti, has to be understood as Bhagavan's Shakti. It's his power, it's his property. Essentially, Maya is Prakriti and it is made of three gunas, and the three gunas belong to him. Therefore, he uses the gunas. He uses the gunas and he controls them. And the workings of this universe are orchestrated through the force of the Maya, which belongs to the Mayavi Krishna. Very important. Therefore, he says, to the Jiva, Maya is a wheel. To Bhagavan, Maya is the vehicle. Jiva is bound, wheeled. Whereas for Bhagavan, he uses the Maya. So, Gunasya Maya Moolatvan, Name Moksho Na Bandhanam. Then he says, then he talks about bandhana, the samsara bandha of the jiva. Shoka mohau sukham dukkham dehapattischa mayaya swapno yatatmanah khyatihi samsritirnatu vastavi. Just like how Upanishads too keep talking about all the three states. And here too, in Uddhava Gita, we already seen Krishna talking about the dream state. Once again, he takes the example. He takes the example of the dream state once again to show how samsara is anitya. No, samsara is anitya, it is anadi. It is anadi, but it is not nitya. We need to understand these differences. So, for a nitya vastu, it must not only be anitya, for any vastu is nitya when it has no beginning and no end. Samsara has no beginning. It is anadi, but it has an end. We don't know the beginning of samsara, and we don't need to know too, because trying to know the beginning of samsara is looking at a circle and saying, what is the starting point of the circle? It is a futile exercise. But luckily, samsara has an end, that we can find an exit out of the circle. Therefore, samsara has no beginning, it is anadi, but has an end. Therefore, it is anitya. Now, anityatva of samsara, how do we understand? And what is samsara? Essentially, it is misidentification. When I am misidentified with my deha, and therefore the deha sambandhas become my sambandhas, and therefore the results that come out of the deha sambandha become my results. The consequences and experiences which come because of the deha sambandha become my experiences. That is when I remain in samsara. Now, Krishna gives a beautiful analogy once again as to show how this is anitya. He says, Swapno yatatmanah kyatihi samsritirnatu vastavi. Now, when we have swapna dasha, in the dream state, all of us also, we can easily see that we are actually witnessing our own dreams, and in the dream state too, we have a swapna deha, where we identify with our dream body. In any dream that we have, we too have, for want of any other phrase, I am using it, the dream body. And with that dream body, we have deha sambandhas in swapna. And therefore, those deha sambandhas lead to experiences in the swapna. We laugh, we cry, we do all kinds of things, and we undergo all kinds of experiences in the swapna. But the moment we get up, when we are awake, we immediately realize that neither the deha, swapna deha, nor the swapna deha bandhas, nor the experiences the swapna are nitya. They are gone, they are finished. We can easily relate to this and say those are anitya. Now, very important to know, these experiences are real, even in swapna. They are also the outcome of our own karma. They are real, but they are not nitya. And we can easily see they only last until the dream lasts. The moment we are awake, gone. Similarly, this deha sambandha is only for this life, this lifetime. No, we can say a dream lasts for few seconds. Some say I've been dreaming for hours. But it is still seconds to hours. It's a short duration. In that short duration, we can have, some can have multiple dreams, one followed the other. So even if you consider a segment of a dream, in that segment, I specifically have a particular deha sambandha, and various kinds of experiences. The moment that is over, it's clear to me, I am not that deha anymore. Those experiences not mine anyway. Similarly, this life is also like that short duration of the dream, where this deha is not mine. This deha sambandhas are not mine. The experiences I undergo in this very life are not mine. So therefore, he says, the Atma, when it identifies with this body, just like if I identify with my deha sharira, and I had a dream where I went and deposited $1 million in the bank, I cannot wake up next day, go to the bank, knock, and say, I deposited it, can I withdraw? It is not possible. Similarly, I clearly know that deha is anitya. Similarly, this deha is also anitya. This deha sambandhas are also anitya. The experiences, pleasures and pains which come because of this particular deha. Because in my last janma, I had a different deha. And because of that deha, I had different set kinds of experiences. Those were anitya. This also is anitya. So Krishna takes that example to anityatva. He says, therefore, swapno yatatmana khyatihi samshritirnatu vastavi. Now, it's not real. What is not real? The deha is real. The experiences are real. But my identification is not real. My identification with this body is not real. My identification with this world is not real. My identification with the experiences that come because of the engagement with this world are not real. So, therefore, he says, this is the state of the Baddha Jiva, where we forget that this, we forget the anityatva of the deha, anityatva of deha sambandha, anityatva of all the experiences that come along because of this. Then, therefore, what is this reason for this bondage? What is the reason and what is the way out of this bondage is the natural question. And Krishna gives a very profound and powerful shloka here. Answer to that question. Vidya vidye mamatanu viddi uddhava sharirinam moksha bhandha kari adye mayayame vinirmite. He talks about Vidya, Avidya. Simply put, Avidya is the cause for bondage, for samsara, and Vidya is the cause for liberation. Now, here he says, Vidya, Avidya, Mama Tanu, he says. Both are mine, they belong to me. So, Tanu means form, Tanu means body, which essentially says both are mine. Essentially, what he is saying is both depend on my sankalpa. Essentially, they are all forces of my own sankalpa. Vidhi, Uddhava, Sharirinam, Moksha Bandhakari Adye. Moksha Bandhakari. Vidya is responsible for moksha. Avidya is responsible for bandha. Moksha Bandhakari Adye. Mayayame Vinirmite. Again, use of Mayaya. It is because of my Maya. Maya again has to understand his potency, his power. Maya means Bhagavan's power. Prakriti is one manifestation of Bhagavan's power. Maya is not illusion. Maya is not illusory. Maya is the fantastic power of Bhagavan. Therefore, Mayayame Vinirmite. Vinirmite, he arranges. Now, Vidya and Avidya has to be understood a little bit more. And when he says both are products of my Sankalpa, Vidya product of Bhagavan Sankalpa, we can understand. Avidya also is under his Sankalpa. Then immediately we say, oh, he is Bhagavan, it's all the cause, everything is because of him. All my ills are because of him. Natural question. Now, Vidya and Avidya both shape the workings of both karma and unfolding of grace. So we must understand this a little bit carefully. Now, when we talk about karma, we also must talk about grace. In a way, Bhagavan, he governs this creation primarily through two laws. One is the law that we all are aware, the law of karma. Along with it, Bhagavan also employs and deploys another very important law, the law of grace. What is law of karma and what is law of grace? Law of karma governs bondage. It is his law of grace, is kripa. So, to have the similar sounding words, karma, kripa. Let's use karma and kripa. Law of karma, law of kripa. Law of karma governs bondage. Law of kripa governs grace. Now, we need to understand that grace, kripa does not break karma. It overrides karma. Just like we know law of gravity. Law of gravity, it ensures that any object that is thrown up has to come down. It cannot stay up. It cannot keep going up. That is the law of gravity. But there is also aerodynamics, through which the object can go higher, higher and higher. So which means law of kripa is like a higher law, like the law of aerodynamics. Law of karma is like the lower law, the law of which essentially the law of gravity. Now, karma says, through law of karma, Bhagavan says, you must face the result. He says, you must face the consequences. But through the law of grace, he says, I will carry you through. Teshamaham samudharta mrityu samsara sagarat bhavami nachirat parta maya veshita chetasam. On the one hand, through law of karma, he says, you did this wrong, you face the consequence. Nothing, you have to bear the brunt. Through his law of karma, he says, don't worry. Karma is about fairness. Kripa is about generosity, benevolence. Karma, the law of karma is about justice. He takes care of justice through law of karma. But through law of kripa, it is mercy. It's to do with compassion. It's mercy. Through law of karma, it's essentially he says, you deserve this. Essentially, we deserve what we get. This is the law of karma. But through law of grace, Bhagavan gives us what we don't deserve. Through law of karma, we only get what we deserve. Luckily for us, there is another law. It is through law of grace that he actually gives us what we don't deserve, but what we deeply need, what we desperately need. So therefore, we see the workings of this universe. He uses both whereas karma is initiated by the jiva, kripa is initiated by Bhagavan. It is, I begin my act, but Bhagavan works on me through his grace. So therefore, through the law of karma, he governs samsara bandhana. It is through law of grace that he governs the process of liberation. And the law of grace, just like law of karma, is not arbitrary. Sometimes we may think, we clearly know law of karma is not arbitrary. It is very, very clear. Its workings are very clear. There is no arbitrary nature at all. Similarly, law of grace also is not arbitrary. It clearly works when there is total alignment of the individual will with Bhagavan's will. Grace automatically flows. This is the law of grace. And Krishna here, therefore, when he talks about Avidya and Vidya, we must understand both of these shape karma and kripa. Now that we have understood these two laws, the law of karma and the law of kripa, now how do we bring in Vidya and Avidya here, which are the causes for bondage, causes for liberation and bondage respectively? In the case of Avidya, Avidya makes the law of karma necessary. Vidya makes the law of grace effective. Let's understand these two. Why do I say Avidya makes the law of karma necessary? What is Avidya? While it is translated as ignorance, it's much more. Avidya essentially is about the Jivatma turning away from Bhagavan. When the Jivatma turns away from Bhagavan, and when the Jivatma starts to act independently, believing the myth that the Atman is independent, and when the Jivatma acts independently and starts to enjoy independently, that is when it starts to perform karma, which starts to bind. And this karma results in avidya, and this avidya triggers karma, and this karma once again strengthens avidya. This is the avidya karma cycle. Goes on. And for this, Bhagavan comes up with the law of karma. This cosmic law, this which governs how actions are performed and consequences are managed. Where there are short consequences for every action. There is freedom given to the Atman that is performing the action. Therefore, there is freedom, there are choices, there is accountability. Everything is clear. No arbitrariness in this at all. Now, therefore, we can look at law of karma as educational force of avidya. Why I call it educational force? Because in a way, it is through the experiences we are meant to learn and grow. Every experience which is the consequence of our own karma potentially is meant for our own learning and growth. This is what Bhagavan's law of karma aims at. Whether we learn or not, that's our individual will. But the law of karma is meant to be the educational force of avidya. Therefore, that is also Bhagavan's sankalpa. Where did we start? Why did we come here? Because we started saying both Vidya and Avidya belong to Bhagavan, are both due to his sankalpa. Now, law of karma, it is due to his sankalpa. He is karma paladhata. And therefore, avidya too is because of his sankalpa. In a way, it is the educational force of avidya, which is what the law of karma says. Similarly, then, if the law of karma essentially is the educational force of avidya, what is the law of kripa? It is the transformational force of Vidya. Because what happens, what is Vidya? Vidya is not just knowledge, it is also just like avidya is turning away from Bhagavan, Vidya is turning towards Bhagavan. It is turning towards Bhagavan, getting our alignment right. It is only when we turn towards Him that our confusion starts to end. It is only when we turn towards Him, our ego starts to dissolve. Only when we turn towards Him, we start to receive His grace. His grace is always there, 24/7. But are we in a position to receive His grace? So therefore, in a way, Vidya triggers, Vidya makes us a recipient of Bhagavan's grace. That is why Vidya makes the law of grace effective for us. His grace is always there. But whether I am receiving His grace or not, how is that possible? Vidya makes it possible. Avidya makes the law of karma a necessity. Vidya makes the law of kripa effective for each and every individual. Therefore, Krishna here says, Vidya avidye mamatanu viddi uddhava sharirinam mokshabhanda kariradye mayaive vinirmite. And then he goes on now, beautifully now, he concludes this segment of this conversation. Ekasyeva mamamshaya jivasyeva mahamate bhando asya avidyanadihi vidyayacha tatetaraha. As I said right at the beginning, Krishna is now echoing. Now he's talked about the state of bondage, and he's talked about the nature of the Baddha Jiva. He also talked about how Bandha and moksha are not applicable to Bhagavan. It is what the states of the Jiva. Now, he continuing on the cause for bondage and the cause for liberation through Vidya and Avidya, he now says, he also gives the intimate relationship between every Jivatma and Bhagavan. Ekasyeva mamamshasya mamaivamsho jivaloke jivabhuta sanatana. Every Jivatma is Bhagavan's amsha. Now, we discussed this at length in the 15th chapter. This one shloka alone, we spent possibly 2 sessions. So, we are not revisiting the entirety of the discussion there. But what is important to understand? Bhagavan, Krishna is amshi. Every Jivatma is amsha. Loosely translated, amsha means part. Amshi means the whole. But what is important to understand is, if we try to understand it through a material analogy, a part, when it belongs to a whole, when it is removed, then we reduce that much from the whole. But that is not the part-whole relationship when it comes to the Jivatma and the Paramatma. Also, this part is an indivisible part, is an integral part, like the luminosity is a part of the sun. So another way to understand this also is the part and the whole relationship, attribute substance relationship. The color of a rose, the color is a part, it is also an attribute. The rose is a substance and it is also the whole to which the color belongs, and it is inseparable. So the inseparability, the eternality of the relationship, the intimacy of the relationship, the total dependence of the relationship of an attribute that qualifies the substance, all of that must be taken together and understood as amsha and amshi. When he says a jivatma is an amsha, which means it is an indivisible, ever dependent, integral part of the whole that it belongs to, which is Krishna himself. Now, as he says, when this amsha, this part, when it operates through Prakriti, to the products of Prakriti, which is mind and the senses, it is essentially bound by Avidya, is in samsara. And when it essentially, through Vidya, it receives the grace, then automatically, essentially change of direction here again, essentially, it starts to gain moksha, liberation. So therefore he says, Jivasyaiva mahamate bandaha asya avidyanadihi vidyayacha taterataha. So he says, bondage is caused by avidya, and in the state of avidya, this amsha, even though belonging to Krishna, believes that it is independent, even though it is totally dependent, even though it cannot control anything. It thinks, it starts to believe, I am the controller, I am the enjoyer, I am the doer, I am independent. And in that process, it remains in samsara. And with Vidya, it starts to attract the grace, and it is Bhagavan's kripa which slowly and steadily starts to loosen this grip of Maya, of Prakriti, on this Amsha, the Jivatma, and eventually it gets the liberation. So here he once again goes back to the analogy he uses in 15th chapter of the Gita. Therefore he says, Ata baddhasya muktasya vailakshanyam vadamite viruddha dharmino tata stitayo eka dharmini. So we come to why we started the session with the shloka of Mundakopanishad. Yes, let me now tell you the difference between you, a Baddha Jiva, and me, a Nitya Mukta, who is also a co-tenant, who is also a co-traveler. Eka Dharmini, in this one body, you have been traveling, I too have been traveling with you all the time. It's just that you have not noticed me. You've just not noticed me. The Jivatma, while it has been traveling to innumerable bodies, taking innumerable births, Paramatma too has been traveling with the Jivatma together, residing in the same body. That shows Bhagavan's compassion, always there as a co-traveler. He says, now let me tell you the differences between the two, why it's so. Now he quotes, or rather he draws the analogy of the Mundakopanishad. Suparna sayuja sakaya samanam vriksham parishasvajate tayoranyah pippalam swadvat anashnan anyoho abhijakashiti. Suparnav yetau sadrishau sakhayau yadrichayaitau kritanidau cha vrikshe ekastayo khadati pippalannam anyo niranno api balena bhuyan. Here he uses the word yadrichaya. Yadrichaya can mean many things. Yadrichaya means can be by chance, randomly, unexpectedly. In this context, that would completely give a different meaning altogether. He says, yadrichaya, two birds, suparnav etau sadrishau sakhayau yadrichayaitau krita needau. Krita needau means nest. So the Mundakopanishad talks about two birds perched on the branch of a tree. Here is a small change Krishna does. He takes the same analogy. He says they have made a small nest and are living together. Hridaya Kamala. Paramatma is in our Hridaya, the Jivatma is also there. And therefore here, in making a small nest, Suparnav, the two birds are there. Now, Yadrichaya, very important. Yadrichaya also means acting according to one's own will or one's own direction. The reason for the Jivatma to continue to be in samsara, Jivatma cannot blame Paramatma. So it is out of our will that we are prolonging our tenancy in samsara. So therefore, this first bird, which is perched on the branch of the tree in the nest, it's there because of its will. It continues to be there because of its will. So that Yadricha, and Bhagavan too is co-traveling because of his will. So both are there together. And when this first bird realizes that it's been given will only to surrender it to Bhagavan's will. Until then, this journey will go on. So he says, Edrichayaitau kritanidau cha vrikshe ekastayo khadhati pippalannam anyo niranno api balena bhuyat. The two birds have made a mess. One bird, it seems, is constantly eating the fruits of the tree, and the other bird is just witnessing the first bird, which is consuming the fruits of the tree. And the fruit, some fruits are bitter, some fruits are sweet, but this first bird is constantly eating. In spite of continuously eating, it's in a state of grief all the time. Whereas the other bird, which is just witnessing this process, is gloriously looking. It is so glorious, it is blissful, and it as a witness is looking at. Who are these two birds? Now he continues. Atmanam manyam cha saveda vidvan apippalado natu pippaladaha yaha avidyaya yuksatu nityabandhaha vidyamayo yassatu nityamuktaha. Paramatma, who is eternally liberated, because even though he is residing in this very body, the Atman is residing in this body, Atman is imprisoned. But Paramatma is not imprisoned, he is liberated. It's like, if in the kingdom there are jails, all the prisoners are there. The king decides to go and spend time with the jailer, with the prisoner. So both the king and the prisoner are inside the jail. The prisoner is bound, he is jailed, whereas the king cannot be called as a jail. So is jailed. So therefore, Paramatma has decided to be the cotraveller, the second, and he is omniscient, he is omnipotent, and whereas the other bird, which is the Jivatma, is because of Avidya, is suffering the outcome, suffering in bondage. And what is the release? What is the difference in the two states? The two states, the differences can be easily explained. It's essentially in the state of in the state of liberation, the Atma enjoys certain key Kalyana gunas, with the Chandogya Upanishad beautifully declares. Atma apakatapatma vijaraha vimrutyuhu vishokaha vijagatsaha abhibhashaha satyakamaha satyasankalpaha. Now, liberation is essentially reaching that stage where the Atma apakatapatma, devoid of all kinds of sins. No papa karma, no punya karma. Apakatapatma. Vijaraha. There is no more aging. Vimrutyuhu. There is no more death. Vijaraha, vimrutyuhu, vishokaha. There is no more sorrow. Then vijigatsaha. There is no more hunger. Apipasaha. There is no more thirst. Satyakamaha. Desiring only the truth. So for the Mukta only desiring Krishna alone. Satyakamaha, Satyasankalpaha, willing only the truth. That is surrendering its will to Bhagavan's will and blissfully doing his kainkariya. So this essentially differentiates the two states, the state of a Baddha Jiva and the state of a Mukta Jiva. Krishna, we see again in Uddhava Gita, he borrows from the Mundakopanishad and gives the analogy to show the difference. From here on, Krishna is going to explain how this Baddha Jiva can actually practice sadhana to attain nityatva, attain moksha. And in this process, we again see the detailed description of the Gunatita from the 14th chapter being retold in a very beautiful way again here in the 11th chapter of Uddhava Gita. We will continue to relish this in the next session. Sarvam Shri Krishna Arpanamstu.